Okay, I'm receiving a message that the stream is live. Keith, are you live?
Let me see. Just about, I think. Yeah.
Checking for a pulse. You're not.
Yeah. Yep.
You're not a pre-programmed construct.
What would I say if I were?
You would say, "What would I say if I were?"
Exactly. So you'll have to work that one out. You've got 60 minutes or so to work that one out.
So anyway, I'm a pre-programmed construct, and defending the status of pre-programmed constructs all over the universe. And those of you who've never seen The Persuaders, we're the Persuaders. Keith Frankish joining me from Greece, the birthplace of Western philosophy. And then there's me, Pete Mandic. I'm in New Jersey, the birthplace of New Jersey philosophy. And we're here today to promote a product that is going to make one or more philosophers incredibly rich. And I have the product right here. And I don't know if people can see it. So Cliff Sosis, some of you who are philosophy enjoyers who also find yourselves hanging out on social media, you might know about this philosopher Cliff Sosis, who runs a webpage which contains interviews of philosophers, and it's called "What Is It Like to Be a Philosopher?" And Cliff, did he interview you for that thing?
I am in the course of writing.
Yeah, same. I think I've owed him something since 2017. So anyway, people should go read that, but they should also get this and read this. Too Weird to Believe, Too Plausible to Deny is a collection of essays from world famous philosophers such as Keith Frankish, but also like these weird, who is that guy? Like Pete Mandic, how did he sneak in? And the various people contributing to this volume were asked to write something short and controversial, covering all sorts of topics of philosophy. And it's supposed to be something that is comprehensive, but also accessible. And so they got one of the Benatars, either Pat Benatar or David Benatar. I think David Benatar, to argue that no one should have children. And then there's like a essay in there about why paying taxes is worse than theft. All sorts of wild and crazy stuff. We got Luke Roloffs in there arguing for panpsychism. And then there's the two of us. And I wrote a thing about robots and artificial intelligence and how consciousness among the machines is virtually inevitable. And Dr. Frankish, you were writing about illusionism. I think it was pitched as consciousness is not what it seems. That might even be the title.
I believe it is.
And I reread it this morning, and again, I really enjoyed it. So I proposed to Keith right before we went on the air that maybe we would divide our time roughly equally, starting with putting Keith in the hot seat about his article. I've got some questions, and some of it's going to be play acting, because a lot of your article I just completely agree with. What Keith is arguing for is this idea that we very often don't know what is going on with our own consciousness. And that's really a point of contention that's central to a lot of what happens in the philosophy of mind, because a lot of consciousness is supposed to be about the way things appear, and there's claims about privacy and first person authority, maybe even claims like the way things appear with respect to consciousness just is what consciousness is. So this is a domain about which one cannot be wrong. And you might be able to milk that for all sorts of intense metaphysical conclusions, like that the mind is separate from the body. So I proposed that maybe we could find some linking principle between our two articles, and further that it has to do with seeming and appearance, and especially first person appearance. But let me ask you, Keith, do you want to like give a summary of your case or some like nuggets from your case, or should we just jump into me giving you a hard time about
Well,
what you said?
I'm keen to hear what your reactions, but let's put it like this. When we talk about when we use this locution, it seems, it appears to me. What we're doing there is usually we're qualifying a claim about the world. So I a dress that appears different colors to some people, gold to some and blue to others. I look at it and I say it looks golden or whatever. And so science goes, well, look, it's not really. Look, let's look at it in this light or whatever. Or they do some in spectroscopy, sort of test on it or whatever, and they say, look, it's actually blue. I can then say, well, okay, maybe it's not really gold, but it seems gold to me. Okay, so we make this move where when it turns out that our perceptual reports about the world are not accurate, we can retreat and say, well, at least it appears that way to me. It seems that way to me. And we can even do this with the features of our own body. I mean, somebody who's had a limb amputated might say, look, I've got this pain in my. There might be, if that's temporarily forgotten that they had the amputation. I say, I've got this pain in my limb. And so I said, but your limb isn't there. Say, well, it certainly seems as if I've got a limb and there's a pain in it. So we do this thing where somehow our senses are misleading us. But we want to insist that while we're wrong about the world, we're right about something. Right about how it seems. Now, one way of construing that is that there's this sort of interior world composed of mental items, seemings, appearances, sensations, whatever word we want to use. And although we can be wrong about the outer world, we can't be wrong about this inner world. Okay, so when the dress seems, just looks golden to me, there really is something that's gold color. But it's not something out there in the world, it's something in my head. And the gold and the color, the yellow color, whatever it has, is not quite the same property that the dress seems to have. It's some sort of mental yellowness. Maybe this mental yellowness is all the yellows that there really is, and I'm sort of projecting it onto the world. But anyway, I can be sure about this world of seemings in my head. Now that's what I'm challenging, that way of interpreting talk about how things seem. When we qualify a claim about how the world is by adding it seems that, we are not making a claim about a private inner world of seemings that really are that way. Or at least insofar as there's any truth in that, it's not. I do come out at the end of the article saying there's something in that claim, there's something about that claim that's right, but it's not right in the full-blown way that there's the inner world of mental qualities that stand in place of the qualities that we seem to be aware of in the world and that we know perfectly. And as I raised some in the paper, I raised some empirical objections to this idea, the idea that we always know how this inner world is to us. And I also point out some problems with it, and I offer another way of construing this talk about how things seem.
I wonder if I could.
Yes, come and tell me and give me some.
I think that's a pretty good summary. I think you really captured what Keith Frankish meant to say in his article.
Oh, gosh. He doesn't talk very well enough.
But I wanted to, maybe on behalf of the audience, but also maybe on behalf of the Pete Mandicks in the room, get you to clarify on what might be two separate claims. One about whether there are such things as seemings, and a separate claim about the kind of epistemological claims that get associated with seemings. And one might approach this by way of the following analogy. So putting off like sensory experiences for a second and just talking about beliefs, one way in which we talk about beliefs in the context of wondering, for example, do small children understand what beliefs are? There's this false belief task that I only recently learned was invented by Daniel Dennett. I always just knew about it as this like thing in developmental psychology that kind of probes theory of mind in young children. And the false belief task, the gist of it is you ask some little kid about a story where, you know, there's a character in the story. She's looking for her toy, and she looks in a place where you in the audience know it isn't, because when she wasn't looking, it was moved by someone who's deliberately trying to play a trick on her. And kids past like the age of 2, they are able to attribute to this character that they have a false belief that the toy is in the box and not in the basket where they left it. So one might, from the point of view of an adult who's read too much philosophy and cognitive science, say part of what's going on here is we're explaining the behavior of this character by attributing to this character a kind of a mental state that has this interesting property of sometimes being true. Mental states of this type sometimes are true, sometimes they're accurate, whatever that means, and sometimes they're false, sometimes they're inaccurate. So sometimes she knows, and I'm putting quote marks around knows because I don't want to invite the whole world of academic skepticism to enter the conversation. But in some sense, she knows. Sometimes she knows where the marble is, but on this occasion, she didn't know. She thought it was in this one place. She believed it was in this one place, but the belief is false. And so in some sense, we're reifying belief and we're attributing mental states. And we might say there's a similar sort of thing going on with sensory experiences. We might talk about whether this character saw where the marble was versus she heard about it. Either she heard a noise of the marble being dropped in a can, or she heard some testimony about it. But we might get a little bit more fine-grained than just believes truly versus believes falsely. It might be believes on the basis of a visual experience versus believes on the basis of some auditory experience. And then with respect to those visual experiences, we could talk about whether it was like an accurate visual perception of the way the world is, or this like vision like hallucination, or like an illusory visual perception that kind of gets things right in some ways but might misrepresent sizes. There's a size illusion in play. All of that is fine, right, Keith? Right.
Yeah.
But that's some reification right there. I'm reifying things like experiences, I'm calling some of them visual experiences, and I'm explaining from the third person point of view. In this case, I'm explaining the behavior of my fellow human beings by attributing to them these inner states. They're inner in the sense that I can't just lift open the hood, as it were, look in their brain and immediately read off like, oh, there's a belief about where the marble is. There's a belief about the color of the marble. But as a physicalist, I would presume something like that is going on in there. So it's kind of maybe open about some of the details. But I haven't yet made any super outre epistemological claims about whether the person that has the belief is a better authority about what beliefs they have, right?
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah,
and that's really what you're objecting to. Yes or no?
Yeah, look, pretty much. Yeah. Yes. I mean, sure. When something seems a certain way to you, your sensory system and your cognitive system is in a distinctive state. Okay. Rather like the state you're in when it actually is that way, and you're attending to it and so on. So yeah, there's some interesting story to tell about what's actually happening, which we might tell in representation terms, we might even tell in belief terms if we're too handy, but I'm not sure I might want to be. So yeah, definitely. But it's not a story about kind of mysterious mental colors that are known with a certainty that nothing else is known, that they know that worldly colors can possibly be known. It's not a story about that. So yeah, sure, we've got to say something. We've got to have a story. And I sort of sketched this idea about picking up Dennett's idea about neural fame, about experiences of neural fame, and about monitoring of that neural fame, monitoring the reactive side. And of course, we could, I suppose, do that in terms of beliefs about the. So I think the core of experience is in the reactive side. When we talk about what experience is like, we're gesturing the reactive side of fundamental processing that's caused by stimulation. And I think where there's some sort of higher order monitoring of that, and you could tell this in belief terms. If you water down the notion of belief enough, then I'd probably be happy with that in terms of some sort of some kind of representation about it. But so yes, we certainly need a story, but there's every possibility here that the neuroscientist who knows enough about what's happening in my brain can give that story with a good deal more detail and authority and accuracy than I can, just by saying, well, how do things seem to me? And I come out with, well, it seems, yeah, that was something. You know, okay, that's indicative of you being in some sort of complex internal state, literally internal, inside the skull. But you know, it's not a lot more than that. But in ordinary conversation, in ordinary interaction, we don't question it because there's nowhere we can go beyond that. I mean, if I say, well, that's how it seems to me, that's the end of the story, because you don't have any, literally, you don't have apparatus to probe what really is happening inside my brain and give me a better story. And I'm being sincere. I'm telling you that's how it seems. We know what to do with that information. We know what kind of state I'm in, that I'm in the sort of state I'm in when I'm seeing something that really is yellow, but I'm aware that it may be, or perhaps it certainly is misleading. And we know how to handle those sort of situations. It's a perfectly useful piece of talk. What we shouldn't do with it is start, building sort of metaphysical structures on that bit of talk and whatever interpretations we might intuitively put on it. So I think that was a very long way of saying yes.
Yes. But now I think I might have you in a place that's there might be some interesting possibility for disagreement between the two persuaders. And that has to do with whether there's any sense in which, for example, we can't really further interrogate how it seems to, right? So it's very tempting, even if you think of yourself as a physicalist, and even if you want to be really agnostic about some of these stronger epistemological claims like acquaintance or incorrigibility or infallibility, it's really tempting to still say that maybe there's a certain set of cases whereby, as sometimes get put, seems is not iterable. Even Dennett in certain moods has claimed that, it maybe doesn't make sense to say or ask about whether it merely seems to seem. Right. And I think that's an interesting domain to wonder about. And I'm inclined to push it as far as one might logically push it, which is to say that it's always the case that you can interrogate whether it actually seems a certain way versus seems to seem a certain way. One fun, quickie example is the sort of thing that is used to illustrate confabulation in introductory cognitive science and psychology courses. The famous pantyhose experiment by, I think it was Nesbitt and Wilson did this. So you set up this shopping scenario. People are having an opportunity to select and purchase pantyhose. And then after they make their purchase, there's a questionnaire about why did you choose those pantyhose and not some other pantyhose? And they will now say things like, well, I preferred this color. I preferred or I picked it. I was examining the textures of the different fabrics, and this one was the most soft, pleasing texture. Or I was testing the strength of the fabric. This seemed to me to be the strongest fabric. And the researchers found that to be really quite interesting, because the researchers were very confident that was all bullshit. And the reason they were confident that was all just made up after the fact confabulation is that the researchers know, again, small, lowercase k, no in scare quotes. The researchers know that all the pantyhose samples were the same. That the only thing that predicts what purchase was made is what pantyhose in the display was closest to the shopper's dominant hand. The researchers know that there was no variation in color, there was no variation in fabric or fabric strength or texture. So here's a case in which people are reporting how things seem to them. These pantyhose seem stronger. These pantyhose seem to be a better color. These pantyhose seem to have a stronger or smoother, whatever. All these self-attributions of appearances or seemings were false. And so we might have here an example in which it seemed to them that they made the purchase because of its seeming texture. But we know that can't have been true. That in some sense of how the pantyhose seemed to them, it all seemed the same. There was no variation in lighting that would give us reason to think there was any variation in perceived color. There's no reason to think there was variation in felt texture or felt strength. One might say, well, it's because there's this lag in time that this opportunity for being mistaken about how things seem to one arises. But nonetheless, there's at least one case in which it can seem to you that it seemed to you to be a certain way, and that's not how it seemed to you. You were mistaken about the way things seem.
You are doing a bit of verifying here, because you're saying that.
Oh yes.
There was a seeming, and I had I had to look at this seeming, and I said, oh, it's a seeming of being of better quality or whatever, and I report that. But then maybe you tell me the story, and I have another look at my seeming, and I think, no, actually, it's not better quality. I was this seeming. What's happening here is you're making self-reports. You're being prompted to say how you react to these things. And you're reacting to them in all sorts of ways. I mean, not just verbally. I mean, you maybe spend more time looking at some more than the others, or maybe move closer to them, or whatever. But one of the ways you react to them is by answering questions about them. And if you say which looks better, you say, well, that seems better to me. That's all you can do at that moment. That's your best shot. Maybe you didn't spend enough time thinking about it, whatever, but that was it. That was your self-report at that moment. Now, maybe then you tell me a bit more about the setup of the experiment, and you get me to sort of do a bit more self-reporting, and I sort of maybe have another look, and I think, well, they're telling me these are all identical, so maybe I don't know why I said that one looked nicer.
Right.
But so now I produce another bit of self-report, and I say, well, actually, on consideration, I think you're right, they're all pretty much the same. But that didn't involve my re-inspecting the original seeming and saying, oh, I misdescribed it. It may involve me perhaps having another look at the item itself and having a think about my reactions to it in the light of what you've now, of any extra information I've got. So it certainly didn't involve, I guess, it certainly didn't involve my inspecting some, mysterious non-physical seemings in my head. And I don't think it involved doing anything much more than what I just described.
Well, I mean, there's some sense in which you're going to allow reification of seemings. And I bet I could put it in a really deflationary way that you'd be perfectly happy with. So let's just assume I've done that already.
Okay.
And so this looks like a case in which they in the confabulation, they have made a statement about how things seem to them that we all know is false. We being the researchers. And when we fill in the people about that information, the people might dig in their heels, as was reported in the initial case, when they were confronted with the case for confabulation. They're like, no. I mean, at least some of them stuck to their story.
Well, look, let's put it like this. This is crude, but what I think we're gesturing at when we talk about how things seem is essentially our reactions, psychological reactions. What kind of effect the thing has on me as I look at it, and what kind of all sorts of cognitive, emotional, attentional responses it. Does it grab my attention? Does it make me what sort of memories, what associations does it conjure up? Do I, does it give me a warm, glowing feeling when I look at it? Whatever. I mean, we're talking about pantheon, so it's probably a bit confusing. Anyway, so I look at it the first time, and maybe I consult my reaction. Of course, I could be wrong. I guess in really in describing my own reactions, I could not pay enough attention, or maybe whatever. But let's say I do my best, and I say I kind of like that one more. Now, then you give me a bit more information, all right, about these things, and you tell me that they are, in fact, actually identical products of the same production line, and so on. And so now that changes my reactions. Okay, so I think, well, actually, if they're all the same, that one doesn't really impress me all that much. So I might say I was wrong to be impressed by it. Okay, so I now change my reaction and report that changed reaction. That now, no, it doesn't do anything much for me. But that's not correcting my description of my earlier reaction. Is having a different reaction and describing that correctly. And I'd be really interested in how you can find those two relations apart.
Let me try a slightly different example on you and see how it stands up. And this is an example I get from an article written by Keith Frankish that appears in this edited volume by Cliff Sosis. And the example about whether things appear colored in the visual periphery. An example I think we both learned about from Dennett. And I love to illustrate this to my students. I'll bring like fluorescent colored Post-it notes to class. And before I do the little in-class experiment, I'll just ask them, do you think you could see colors in your visual periphery? Now, these students, they're sitting in class with their visual peripheries. So, I mean, they're just, it's not like, they're trying to remember their visual periphery, which they left at home, or their dog ate their visual periphery. It's just right there to be consulted. And they will all say, yeah, it's colored out here. And then you do the demonstration. You start with the Post-it note back behind their head where they can't see it. You ask them to look straight ahead. And as soon as they can see it, say stop.
Yeah.
And then you ask them, okay, what color? And the target colors are as salient as a colored object can be. Fluorescent pink versus fluorescent green. And I'll have multiple Post-it notes. So there's like, a fluorescent canary yellow, and there's a lot of choices, and they just suck at getting the right answer. And it's really, we don't run stats, but it's just clear to everybody. It's one of these like almost chemically pure experiments. And I think if you look really, really, really closely at if you did this in a lab setting, you might convince yourself that maybe there is a little bit of color detection for peripherally presented, but nonetheless, the main result, without me implanting ideas in the kids' heads, the students' heads, is they're surprised to learn that they can't see the colors in their visual periphery. And even after they have granted that, it's not like they suddenly become aware that it's all like black and white out here.
Yeah.
Right. I still have this impression that I've got like flesh colored hands, and I still have flesh colored hands. So I want to describe that as a case in which it seems to people like they have fully colored visual peripheries, and they're wrong about that. They're wrong about whether things seem colored in their visual peripheries. It seems to people that they have colored appearances in their visual peripheries, and they're wrong about that. So we could describe, and I am very alive to the possibility of over reification here. I'm not committed to there being separate things in the head and one of them pointing at the other, but whatever seemings are, we've got one of them which is about how things seem with respect to when they're presented to us visually. And then there is how things seem when they're presented to us visually. And this is a case in which we are iterating seams. It seems to me that I have colored appearances all the way out here, and I'm wrong about that. I don't have colored, things don't seem colored out here. I think that they seem colored out here. And I might even be inclined to think that even after I've learned better. So I know you're not trying to establish a Cartesian protected realm, but nonetheless, like I'm inclined to say, like it's very un-Cartesian, and you and sometimes Dennett are inclined to try to concede some kind of non-correctability. And I really enjoy. Hold on. I'm getting a weird echo. Are you hearing an echo?
No, I'm fine. I don't know if anyone else is.
It might just be on my end.
If anyone who's a weird echo, perhaps they just comment. Oh, yes, someone is. Oh, Christina is getting a weird echo.
Okay, so Christine and I are both hearing the echo.
And so, yes, they're hearing an echo. What do we do about this then? I could try switching a microphone, or it just started.
Hello.
Still
happening.
Everything sounds fine to me, so I wonder if that's...
What happens if you mute yourself?
Okay, good. Everyone.
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. Keith is the culprit. The echo has gone away when Keith mutes himself. So while Keith is rearranging his wires, I'll say that what I wanted to shift our focus to is an example from Keith's article about a fire alarm that shouts out, "The fire alarm is going off." So we're supposed to imagine a really, dumb, this is not some fancy artificial intelligence system. It's just a stupid fire alarm, smoke detector, perhaps. And instead of making a loud beep, beep noises, it plays this recorded English utterance. The fire alarm is going off. And Keith, correct me if I'm misrepresenting your example, but I think you say this is simultaneously a report that the fire alarm is going off, but it's also this interpretable noise. It's also constituting the fire alarm going off, and in that latter aspect cannot be corrected. Like it can't be wrong about that.
I think by the way, am I okay now? Is this coming across
yes
better? Good.
And more importantly, I'm okay. I'm not echoing.
Okay. You're fine. Everything's been fine about it. I hope I say partially constitutive. It's one of the I say that seeming is undergoing a certain pattern of reaction to the world. So seeming yellow is undergoing kind of the yellow response to the world, the visual response to the world. And being disposed to say that's yellow or that looks yellow is part of that response, part of what makes it the case that you're undergoing the yellow response to something, which might be triggered by something, well, usually is, I guess, triggered by something yellow, but can be triggered by loads of other things as well. Now, there's much more to that reactive pattern than just being disposed to say it's yellow, much, much more. I mean, I'm the last one I don't want to privilege language in this at all. And we might have a difference there. But it is one aspect of the reaction. And I'm not saying that, but that constitutes having a yellow experience, but it's a bit of it. And it's enough to explain, I think, the intuition that we can't be wrong about this, because being disposed to say it looks yellow is part of what it is to be undergoing the yellow reaction to something. But there's nothing very deep that follows from that, just as there isn't in the case of the fire alarm.
I think you and I are very close to being on the same page about this. But nonetheless, part of being an academic is splitting hairs that have already been split. And so I'm going to engage in that and split it even more. Because I worry that we are now talking about an issue that is underneath a lot of stuff happening in this neck of the woods, stuff in philosophy of mind, in the dualism versus materialism debates. We can trace at least as far back as Descartes, but also stuff about like idealism. And So one diagnosis of what's going on here, and this is the way I would want to describe this particular kind of case, is there's a triviality. It's not just, as you say, not that big of a deal, but it's outright trivial. And one way to put the triviality would be something like this. If I'm having a yellowish experience, then I'm having a yellowish experience. Right? And that's just a triviality, and it doesn't matter what you plug in for P. If P, then P. So if I'm thinking, one thing that follows from that just logically, if I'm thinking, then I'm thinking. That's an utter triviality. There's nothing interesting about that. But many people, I'm not accusing you of this, but many people out there, Keith, will take that triviality and then make a little adjustment. And next thing you know, they think they've concluded from this very, very defensible claim. It's so defensible as to be like an utter triviality, to this much thicker claim. Like, if there's one thing I know, it's the inside of my own mind. Or we can't know anything external to the mind at all. Like, it's just pure noumena out there. But what we do know are appearances, which are representations, which is the mind itself. And right, you get all these like big, grand metaphysical and epistemological projects erected on what is this utter triviality. So in the case of the fire alarm, I'd say, like, if the fire alarm is going off, then the fire alarm is going off. Now there's this misleading thing that happens, and that is if we write, like, if a flag goes up and we've written on the flag, a flag has gone up, now it kind of looks like we have this intentional system that also has the curious property of being guaranteed to be right about itself in at least one case. Like, we've made a cogito flag, the flag that self-describes. And there's been a bit of a magic trick there. There's some sleight of hand, and I want to make sure people aren't befuddling themselves. It doesn't matter when you write on the flag. If the flag goes up, then the flag goes up.
Well, right. Look, if you're in the seeing yellow condition, you're in the seeing yellow condition. Sure. How do you know you're in the seeing yellow condition? Well, for non-linguistic creatures, non-reflective creatures, they just enter this condition and then they go into another condition, and yada yada yada, and they never reflect on it or whatever. But we're reflective creatures. We can ask ourselves what condition we're in, and we can tell other, which I guess is parasitic on our ability to tell other people what condition we're in, because we're social creatures and it's useful to share information about what conditions we're in. So how do I know what condition I'm in? Well, I sort of ask myself, I say, what does that look like? Well, it looks yellow, and it may not be yellow, but I'm sort of in the yellow response mode. I'm certainly in that, because I'm disposed to tell you that, and that's as far as I can go. Now, okay, I could be wrong, but maybe I'm not really in the seeming yellow mode. But that's the best I can do, is ask myself what mode I'm in and see what I'm inclined to say. Okay, and so it is really as trivial as having it written on the flag. That's meant to that is meant to have that deflationary, because all we know is what label we're inclined to put on it. Now, that label could be in principle wrong, but there's no way we have of correcting it. So we take it as being, well, that's the best I can do, mate.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm okay with that. That there's always going to be some point where, like, we run out of things to say.
And so my point then is
some point or other.
And so my point is, that's where we just run up against this thing. Look, I'm telling you, it seems yellow. I'm asking myself what experience I'm having, and I'm telling you the words that culture has provided me with to describe it, and that's it. Are you not? Don't you believe me? We get offended. We think that you might think that I'm lying or trying to deceive you or something. That's it. Finished. Now, that really is. That is a kind of trivial stopping point. It has to be. It's more than just being in the mode, because it's also reporting that I'm in the mode to the best of my ability. Now, the reason I want to stress this point is not because I want to build anything, but I want to understand why people are so tempted to build things on it. And I think just telling them, don't build things on it, that's stupid, is kind of right, but not helpful. If we say, look, I understand why you want to do that, but it's for this really innocuous reason that is kind of easily explained, and you shouldn't trust it. I think this is where I kind of think, remember that original exchange, whereas you just want to say to people, just stop it. I kind of want to say to them, I understand.
Well, what I'm saying right now,
you're trying to do that.
By the way, the way you just described it now, I think is completely fine. It is not saying what I'm hearing you say in your fire alarm case. This is the best I could do is way different from, in some sense, I can't be wrong. You've done your best, so therefore you're exculpated. We can't really blame you.
There's no procedure we have for correcting it. I mean, the fire alarm thing was.
Well, I think. Maybe I am disagreeing with you now. I think there is I think that it's always open to interpretation. We can reinterpret it, and we could decide you were wrong in your self-attribution. You're always making a guess. Like you say, it's these reactions, but you never really know what your reactions are, even if what you claim to know about your reactions is that you're reacting. Well, I mean, what is we could even,
you can know that one of trivially that what you can know one of your reactions because it's the one that it is constituted by saying it seems yellow. So I can and that's just very, very shallow. There's nothing much there to it because,
but it's still,
it's that bit of linguistic activity is pretty.
I think there's a step that's even shallower, and that's doing a lot of the work in setting up what ends up being the mistake that the Cartesians make, for example. I've lost my thought. I've lost my train of thought. I had one more thing to say, but maybe we should.
I want to get onto your paper. Do you want to fire off the last thing very quickly, or shall we just move on?
I forgot what my last thing was, so maybe that was it wasn't worth remembering. Well,
I'm sure we'll have a chance to come back to it. I think this is a really interesting issue here, and it'd be good for us to pick it up.
Well, it's got to come back in my article, and. So just to give let me do a very quick summary.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your paper is called what's the weird thing that you're trying to persuade people of in your article? It's that machines are going to be conscious.
Conscious intelligent robots will one day walk the earth was the original title, and our wise editor convinced me to change it to something else, which is better. But of course, I didn't make it up. So I don't remember it, but I'm looking it up right now, and it's conscious intelligent robots are virtually inevitable.
Virtually inevitable.
Virtually inevitable. Which is fine. But so I'm trying to argue for not just the possibility of machine intelligence and consciousness, but the nigh inevitability of it, assuming that we aren't wiped out. By a dirty telephone receiver. Douglas Adams reference there. They shipped off the telephone sanitizers, and then everyone went extinct from an unsanitary telephone. So assuming we don't, get wiped out from some germ we caught from a telephone, or total economic collapse or global rise of fascism, something like that. We're going to make conscious and intelligent machines. And most of the discussion is about the relative merits of Searle's against the Turing test and those sorts of approaches to this question of machine intelligence and machine consciousness. And on the other hand, this argument that I think first comes to us from Arnold Zuboff in The Mind's Eye, but then David Chalmers comes along and makes a lot of hay out of it in his 1996 book, The Conscious Mind. And this is the silicon chip or neural prosthesis thought experiment. And it's very interesting to me to pit those two arguments against each other, in part because they both turn on thought experiments. They're very fun to visualize. Thought experiments, you're imagining John Searle in the Chinese room, and then you're imagining the surgical procedure of slowly being replaced by cybernetic parts. And further, and I should also advertise that I argue a lot of this stuff in a lot more depth in an earlier paper called Robot Pain, which appears in Jennifer Korn's edited anthology on the philosophy of pain. And one of the things I'm interested in pitting these arguments against one another is the way in which they both appeal to the first person point of view in making the case. So in the Searle's Chinese room argument, which I presume people are somewhat familiar with listening to this discussion right now, the initial setup is Searle is following these rules. This program has been written out in a book, and he's following the program to manipulate cards to make it seem to people on the outside of the room that there is something or other inside the room that is capable of passing the Turing test for having an intelligent conversation in Chinese. Where inside the room is John Searle, who he has told us he doesn't understand Chinese. He's just following this rule book that's written in English, and it's a rule book that is isomorphic to a computer program that, if run on a computer, would itself pass the Turing test for being a Chinese understander. And Searle says, look, according to functionalism, according to computational functionalism, anything that follows this program thereby understands Chinese, but I'm following the program and I don't understand Chinese. So boom, there's a counterexample to functionalism. It defeats functionalism. Mm-hmm. And as many people who first heard this argument from Searle pointed out, there's this systems reply. It now gets called the systems reply. And when Searle discusses this in print in his BBS article about this stuff, he moves right through that objection to a second formulation of the argument where he gets rid of the room. In some sense, the Chinese room is dead as a thought experiment before you even get all the way through Searle's argument, because the systems reply is just this killer reply to that setup. The systems reply says, look, Searle, maybe you don't understand Chinese, but you're just a part of this whole system, which includes the rule book and the cards. And it's the system that understands Chinese. So what if you don't understand it? Functionalism survives. And so he goes to this other thought experiment where he says, well, now imagine I've memorized all of the rules, and, you know, it's a thought experiment. So imagine that I'm fast enough and have enough of a memory. So I don't even need to do this in writing. I'm not even looking at pictures. You're just speaking Chinese to me. I've memorized all the different sounds and consulting them, the rules in the book, and all without understanding Chinese. I'm able to make the sounds with my mouth and fool you into thinking I understand Chinese. Aha! According to functionalism, anything that follows the program understands Chinese, but I'm following the program and I don't understand Chinese.
Can I come in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to come in there because there's a real sort of bait and switch there, because all that he's mastered is the ability, let's take the case where he's memorizing things. All he's mastered is the ability to process Chinese sentences, okay? He's not mastered the ability to use those sentences in real world context. So suppose somebody says to him in Chinese, what is a peach, okay? And he says, oh, it's a fruit and whatever, you describe a peach. Okay, now suppose they say to him, what is this? And they hold up a peach in front of him. Now, what is his mastery of the rules going to permit him to output? Nothing, because all he's learned is transitions, and that won't work with context-dependent terms such as demonstratives. Now, none of this counts against functionalism, because the functionalist will say that all this story about using demonstratives and perceptual processes that you need to to recognize the thing and then begin whatever to fill out the meaning of the demonstrative. All that can be done in computational terms, so as well, and so on and so on. But that's not included in his story. Okay, so it looks there's something that he's getting right there, that just being able to do input-output transitions on sentences won't give you the rich understanding of that normally comes with a linguistic competence. But in no way does that count against functionalism.
I usually wouldn't say something.
Very narrow sort of.
I usually wouldn't say something like the following, but thankfully, John Searle is dead. And because he's dead, I'm able to channel his spirit. And I feel his spirit flowing through me right now. And here's what John Searle has to say to you, Keith Frankish. Okay, I'm speaking on behalf of John Searle, who I'm channeling. Look, let's modify the thought experiment. Imagine that we scan the brain of a human being who has been interacting with peaches, et cetera, or we train LLM that's inside of a robot to interact with peaches through its visual cameras, blah, 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 blah. We take all that, put it into a computer program, and then John Searle, memorize that program. It's not just a Chinese understanding program that could fool you in the context of a text chat. It's a Chinese understanding program that is simulating a Chinese person who's been raised interacting with peaches, blah, 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 blah. And now here I am, John Searle, I'm running this program. From the outside, by all objective third-person appearances, I appear to understand Chinese. But John Searle, on the inside, in virtue of my first-person point of view, I know that I don't understand Chinese. So, okay, Pete Mandic is back. Let me just Pete-itize this.
Let me reply. I want to reply to John. Okay.
Can I just say, so what Pete says about this is that the crucial steps that are always being made in this argument is a retreat to the first person or the subjective. And saying there's this subjective criterion for understanding Chinese. And the trick is to separate that from any objective criteria you might try to introduce. Any third person criteria for understanding Chinese, like whether it's just observing someone's behavior, observing their speech output, or you might want to introduce third-person accessible neural criteria. You might want to say you only count as a Chinese understander if you have a human temporal lobe that's interacting with human frontal lobes, and further, it had a meat body and all of whatever. You could take that and do this brain simulation reply thing, and then Searle will always come back and give you some thought experiment whereby we're supposed to believe that he knows from the inside that he doesn't understand Chinese, and he can nonetheless do all the outside observable stuff for understanding Chinese. Okay. That's the Pete thing. But you go ahead and respond to Searle.
Can you get Searle back? Can you get him back?
Oh, yeah, he's back. All right, John here. All right, what's your thing?
What? Why do you come and do anything? That's bullshit. Because the impression you make upon yourself is equally the product of all those functional processes. It's as much a product of them as your impression you make on anybody else. If you replicate all of those functional processes, then everything is the same. And the plausibility your argument gained came from your focusing on a very narrow set of those things, the linguistic inputs and outputs, which in itself obviously doesn't constitute a full understanding of language. And you've just admitted that by accepting that you need to account for a vast array of other processes on which those linguistic processes were drew and were based. So you've essentially just admitted that it was a bait and switch. So thank you for conceding that point, and just explain to me how this first person impression that you have of your own mind is created without any of those processes, or independently of those processes. What else is it? How does it work? Is there some magic in neural tissue over and above what it is doing that somehow that's dualistic through and through, and yet you're supposed to be a physicalist? It's just bait and switch. You're full of crap. Does he want to come back?
Searle, he left. I don't. But yeah, I think we probably have the same, if not similar, diagnoses. That really what Searle is doing is dualistic from the get-go. He's got this dualism. Yeah. It's a metaphysical dualism between the subjective and the objective, and then, as often comes with these dualisms, there's also an epistemological dualism. On the subjective side of things, the subject has this authority. The subject knows whether they understand Chinese or not. But then that really, you've begged all the important questions. The really important question is like, well, could we make a thing that understands Chinese? And when you really dig into it, like, what would the subjective impression of knowing a language be? Couldn't you pull apart, and this speaks to seemings and appearances, couldn't you pull apart the appearance of understanding Chinese from actually understanding Chinese? I had one of my favorite LSD experiences I had was once during an LSD trip. I was alone in a room with a television that was playing some German movie or German TV show. And I sat there for what had to be like a half hour, convinced that I could understand German. And part of what was happening was that, like, I could, like, there's certain things I did understand. It was human beings, and you can tell when someone's angry versus not angry. But I was so high that, and I was tripping balls. And I had this like intense impression, like, oh my God, I can understand German. And at no point, like in retrospect, I know that at no point did I even ask myself, well, what are they saying then? If you understand German, well, what did they just say? It never even occurred to me to ask myself that question. But afterwards, I'm like, oh, what did they say? And I don't remember a single thing they said. I couldn't even say what they were talking about after the fact. But I had this very strong impression that's probably similar to what happens with deja vu. You have this strong impression that you were in this place before. Does that mean you were in the place before? No, it's possible that you just had a misfire of that seeming. And it's a feeling of knowing that's inaccurate. It's illusory or hallucinatory. So why would we credit that Searle has a 100% reliable feeling of knowing?
One of the interesting things, of course, when you learn a second language is that you know you're making progress when you stop having any phenomenologies of understanding, when you don't have to sort of kind of think at all of what that means. You just, somebody says something and you just reply without considering what language it was in, whether it's in Greek or English or whatever. You just, that's it. And you may, I mean, my Greek isn't great, but if I say something and I get it right and it's simple enough, and you might ask me, did you say that in Greek or English? I don't know. I just replied. It's a matter of effortless competence, which is precisely what the Searle in his internalized rulebook thing is supposed to have. So
now, one thing I like about the other argument that I talk about in this article, and this is an argument that Chalmers likes for very similar reasons, although he tries to wiggle out with his dualism intact at the end of his discussion of it. But Chalmers and I both really like this kind of pro-robot conclusion that you get from the silicon neuron chip replacement argument. But just, for those who haven't guessed how this is supposed to go, like, we start with someone like me who I have supposed qualia. Let's just grant that for the argument. I have pain experiences. I understand English, and then we start removing my neurons and replacing them with microchips. And in each phase of this procedure, you invite the person running the thought experiment. Well, do you think you would still have consciousness? Do you think that you would, if you had, 1/4 of your brain replaced, one half of your brain replaced, 7/8 of your brain replaced? Is there any point at which the lights would go off? It would be all dark inside. And this is not just some Sorites argument. There's this crucial point in the argument where you consider the thought experiment version whereby, yes, there is some point at which the lights go off. And then Chalmers says, well, now imagine we can flip a switch, right? So instead of replacing neurons with prostheses, we put the prostheses in and leave the neuron in too, and just have some kind of switch, so we could switch back and forth, kind of like Dennett, Where Am I? Yorick style, right? You switch back and forth between the simulated brain and the real brain. Now, there's two possibilities of what happens. In the one case, your consciousness goes away. In the other case, your consciousness doesn't go away. But here's the curious thing. Since we have defined the set of microchips as being functionally equivalent to the neurons, then you're going to speak in all the same ways either way. And you're going to dump into memory all the same encodings. And so when you interrogate yourself, when you try to do the first person point of view and ask yourself, am I still conscious? There's some sense in which you're going to come up with a yes. And whether you come up with a yes or not is just going to come down to like how much you can really believe in dualism. If dualism is true, then the first person point of view is this separate thing, which is separate from this causal structure, which is present in both the neural case and the silicon case. But otherwise, you're led to this view whereby, like, yeah, of course, I in some real sense, I wouldn't even notice it if all my consciousness goes away. And Chalmers is it's very Dennettian, and Chalmers is heavily influenced by Dennett. And Chalmers is enough of a Dennettian to say, like, oh, well, this is why he favors this kind of functionalism, Chalmers, just for the possible worlds we live in. But nonetheless, in the grand space of possible worlds, qualia aren't identical to physical properties, because it's still logically conceivable that your consciousness would go away. But since it's so weird,
that whole chapter.
Yeah. Since it's so weird to say,
whole chapter in. Sorry. Okay.
Just to finish the sentence. Since it's so weird, this is Chalmers again. Since it's so weird to say that your consciousness would go away, then in this neck of the possible world space, there is this fairly tight relationship between conscious experience and robot replicable functional structure.
Yeah. I mean, that chapter in Conscious Mind, the dancing qualia, fading qualia, it could be an addendum to quine and qualia.
Yes.
The examples are, the thought experiments are wonderful. And I think I really puzzled Dan as to how someone could understand these arguments so well. And he did come up with his own variants of them, and present them so clearly, and yet still not draw the obvious. To Dan, the obvious moral, and obvious to me too.
I think the answer is because Chalmers is a math guy, and Dennett's a science guy.
Maybe.
And
so why math guys are more open to abstraction.
Science guys care more about stuff like abduction, and
right.
Where science guys are about like what you can prove, and if you can't prove it, then as long as you can conceive it, your tentacles reach out to platonic space, and that's the real stuff. And so I think there's this intellectual temperament difference that you see between heavily math influenced philosophers and people that kind of think more like a natural scientist, where a natural scientist
that's interesting, isn't it?
doesn't care about math that much.
You look at people like Penrose, or for example, the wonderful math guy, but he's maths guy, I should say. But very open to all sorts of dualistic stuff.
Yep,
that's an interesting hypothesis. It'd be worth doing a little bit of sociology of philosophy on that one, I think.
I don't know if
anyone's done it.
I was first caused to suspect this by some interactions I had with Graham Priest, who's a very cool guy, but also a math guy. And he takes the Searle Chinese room argument way more seriously than most of my friends. And my diagnosis is that math guy.
I'm trying to think of the mathematicians. I can think of one or two.
No, I'm not talking about
mathematicians.
mathematicians, Keith. I'm talking about math guys in philosophy.
Oh, right. Math guy. Okay. Yeah,
math guys.
Yeah.
Or there might be some math ladies too that are like this, but it's usually dudes in philosophy who have like a heavy math background that end up believing in monads or something.
Well, it's definitely something interesting to explore. I asked if anyone has any questions, but none have shown up. So I guess
they fell asleep.
Maybe we could wrap up. I just wondered, do you want to just mention a few more of the papers from Cliff's volume? You mentioned the one on antinatalism. What mentioned ours? What are some other highlights? Just to tempt.
There's one about lying.
Lying. Arguing that lying is okay.
It's either that Kant was right about lying or Kant was wrong about lying. One of those. I forgot which. There's one about whether you should ever believe scientific theories or never believe scientific theories.
Oh, I don't want to let your current health secretary read that one, do you? Yeah, I've got this. You are not responsible for your actions. That's one. I not just you, I think, but people in general. Your property doesn't really belong to you. Absolutely anything can be art. That's reassuring.
Yes.
Biases are morally good and help us understand reality. Yeah, I can see that. Having a disability can be good for you. Here, this is the one. You should never lie. Never ever lie, even to save a life. That sounds Kantian to me. He was quite strict on that, wasn't he? I should be giving the so lying is always wrong. That's Krista Thomason. Not being an evil bastard is hard. Alistair Norcross. Polyamory is not cheating. Kerry Jenkins. There's no duty to obey the law. Jason Brennan. More lives better than good lives. Jesper Ryberg. We should not reproduce it as David Benatar. Taxes aren't just, they're much worse. Adam Moore. Your property isn't really yours. Again, I don't think it just means yours, Pete. Christine Stiplovich. Ignorance is the foundation of justice, Marcus Arvan.
Yeah, I was just looking at that title, thinking that, a bunch of these I haven't read yet, but I definitely want to read them. I could also imagine this being this would be a great thing to base a course on for if you're teaching.
Wouldn't it? I mean, I don't know what parts I won't go through all of them, but there are some sexist, socially constructed, conscious, intelligent robots are virtually inevitable. Conscious everywhere. There is no self. The past and the future are as real as now. Heather Dyke. Reality doesn't matter. Believe it every day. Should you believe nothing when Commissania? Well, I'm Graham Priest in it. Actually, nothingness, the contradiction at the ground of reality. Now, I've missed some out there, so apologies to any authors who's wanted it. But I think you can see that it's at the very least a provocative volume, and that Cliff made us all work quite hard to really refine down the arguments into a short space of about 4,000 words, was it? Something like that, in that sort of region. So you can read these over a coffee. They're not, and they're presented very accessibly. So, and as Pete said, I'm sure it will make a good course.
And one thing I noticed just working with Cliff on this, and I think I said this to Cliff, like, I've had lots of editors. I've been in lots of anthologies before, and often it's very hands off. You might get some feedback from the external referees or something like that, but the editor themselves often has a fairly light touch, where in this case, like, Cliff definitely had a vision. He really had this vision for the tone and the level of depth and the topics and the titles, and was really good about making his suggestions clear but not being forceful about that. Like, I didn't feel like I was being bossed around.
Absolutely.
But I was super happy with all his editorial suggestions and recommendations, and I thought it was a cool project. And
me too.
that was
I absolutely good.
That was just while I was working on it, but now that it's come out, I think it's really cool. So people should buy it or steal it. I'm sure Cliff won't mind me saying that there's no such thing as property. So, right? Steal his book. Sorry, Cliff.
And we're not getting a cut on this. We're saying this is this is sincere.
Not only are we not getting a cut, I paid for this with my own money because I forgot to fill out the form to get my author's copy sent to me, so I just bought it.
I don't know if I filled out the form, but so really, I think it's going to be fantastic. As you say, as a course book, but also as a book if you just want to wind up your family. Get this. Yeah. Read one of these and then just go and argue some really counterintuitive position with make a really powerful case for it. This could be great for Thanksgiving, I'm sure. It's just what
somebody should make a response book that is just like the most boring shit they can imagine.
I think that market may be saturated.
No, I mean go far. Like argue there are hats. Or one of the articles could be like, some things have happened. Really just go in the complete opposite direction.
Some things have happened. I'd love to imagine that. We should collaborate on that one.
Let's do it, yeah.
Okay, it's been great talking to you as always. I hope the people listening have enjoyed it. And again, many congratulations to Cliff on this great book. And we'll see you again another time. See you again, Pete, and see the viewers, listeners again another time. Bye-bye all. Take care.